Crash landing on Zareth 9. Theme: Survival and First Contact. The colony transport ship U.S. Resolute tore through the upper atmosphere of Zareth 9 like a wounded bird, trailing plasma fire and broken hull fragments behind it. Dr. Elena Vasquez gripped the crash harness until her knuckles went white. Emergency klaxons screamed. Warning panels turned every shade of red the designers had available. Hull integrity at 11%. The ship's AI Eris announced in that maddeningly calm synthetic voice. Impact in 42 seconds. All crew assume crash positions. 42 seconds. Elena had spent 23 years as a xenobiologist studying alien ecosystems from the safe distance of orbital platforms. She had written 47 peer-reviewed papers. She had never, not once, been in a crashing spaceship hurtling toward an uncharted jungle world. The Resolute hit the canopy of Zareth 9's northern continent at 340 km per hour. Elena came to consciousness with the smell of ozone, burning polymer, and something impossibly sweet, like jasmine crossed with rotting fruit. She was hanging sideways in her harness. The ship had come to rest at a severe angle against the enormous trunks of trees that defied any botanical classification she had ever studied. They were violet-barked and easily 40 meters in circumference, their canopy so dense above that almost no direct sunlight reached the forest floor. What illuminated the world instead were the trees themselves, faint, pulsing blue-green bioluminescence running through every vein of bark and leaf like circuitry come alive. She released her harness and dropped to what was now the floor, the starboard wall. Her head rang. A cut above her left eye had bled enough to crust along her cheekbone, but her limbs worked. She took inventory before she let herself feel anything. 2 functioning legs, 2 arms, no compound fractures, a bruised rib at minimum, and a biosuit that had taken a long gash along the left forearm but had sealed itself with emergency polymer. Eris. Her voice came out hoarse. Status. Main propulsion, destroyed. Communications array, destroyed. Emergency beacon, active but signal blocked by local atmospheric ionization layer. Power reserves, 14 hours at minimal operation. Current crew status, you are the only conscious survivor. Engineer Okafor has a head trauma and is unconscious but breathing. Medic Chin is in cryostabilization due to internal injuries. 2 survivors. The Resolute had launched with 9 crew. Elena pressed that knowledge down into a compartment in her mind and locked it. Grief was a luxury she could not yet afford. She crawled through the twisted corridor to the emergency locker, yanked it open and took careful, professional stock of what she had. 1 standard-issue survival kit, fire starters, water filtration tabs, emergency rations for 72 hours for 1 person, a folding multi-tool, a flare gun with 6 cartridges and, crucially, her personal field kit. She had packed the field kit obsessively before every mission. Inside, a compact spectral analyzer, sample containers, a stun baton rated for creatures up to 300 kilograms, and her father's old K-bar knife in a leather sheath. The knife had belonged to Master Sergeant Hector Vasquez, U.S. Marine Corps, before Earth stopped having Marine Corps. He had carried it through 2 wars. He had taught Elena to use it when she was 12. The universe, he used to say, always eventually puts a knife in your hand. She had never believed him. She believed him now. Elena emerged from the Resolute's broken hull into the alien jungle and felt, for a moment, the sheer overwhelming weight of where she was. Zareth 9. Pre-survey. No prior human contact. A world flagged by the Survey Corps as Class 4, hostile biosphere, megafauna confirmed, colonization risk assessment. Extreme caution. The bioluminescent light pulsed around her. Somewhere in the middle distance, something very large moved through the undergrowth with a sound like a dozen trees rubbing against each other. The air was thick and warm, loaded with complex organic chemistry, her lungs processed with minor chemical assistance from the biosuit's filter collar. She pulled up Eris on her wrist terminal, the only piece of the ship's intelligence small enough to have survived in portable form, and set it to passive sensor mode. The jungle immediately lit up with threat indicators. Heat signatures. Movement signatures. Biological mass readings. Everything in every direction was bigger than her. Elena Vasquez, xenobiologist, sole functioning crew member of a destroyed colony ship, stood in the middle of a jungle that had never learned to fear humans, and she made a decision. She would not be prey here. She would study this world the way she had always studied alien worlds, systematically, carefully, and with absolute respect for what she was dealing with. But she would do it as a predator, not as a victim. She checked the charge on the stun baton. She unsheathed the K-bar and tested the edge. She pulled up the spectral analyzer and pointed it at the nearest bioluminescent trunk, beginning her first field notes on Zerath 9. She had 14 hours of Eris power, 72 hours of rations, and the entire hostile biology of an alien planet between her and survival. She began to walk, recording everything. Her father's knife hung at her hip. She was a long way from any orbital platform. But she was a Vasquez. And Vasquez people, as her father always said, did not die politely. 3 hours into her survey walk, the jungle around her went completely silent. Every bioluminescent pulse in the nearby trees dimmed to almost nothing. In xenobiology, that kind of synchronized biological response had a name: predator silence. Something at the top of the local food chain was nearby, and everything that could sense it had gone still. Elena stopped walking. She breathed slowly through her nose. She went very, very quiet, and she listened. The sound that came was unlike anything in the database. A deep sub-bass vibration she felt through her feet before she heard it through her ears, followed by a clicking, rapid, complex, almost rhythmic, that her spectral analyzer immediately flagged as possible echolocation. Then, between two of the massive violet bark trees, she saw it, 8 meters tall, 6 limbs, an armored carapace that shifted color as it moved, and a head that was entirely sensory organ. No visible eyes, just rows of receptor membranes that flickered and adjusted like camera apertures. Eris labeled it, Unknown Megafauna, Apex Classification, Threat Level, Critical. Elena did not run. Running triggered pursuit responses in predators across 47 documented alien species. Instead, she did something her xenobiology doctorate had prepared her for and her father's military training had given her the nerve to execute. She stood completely still, controlled her breathing to suppress her heat and chemical signature as much as the biosuit allowed, and she studied the creature with absolute attention. It was hunting by echolocation and chemical trace. It had not yet resolved her as anything significant. She was small, stationary, and her biosuit was suppressing her biochemical output. For 4 minutes and 37 seconds, the apex predator of Zerath 9 searched the space around her. Then it moved on, its 6 limbs carrying 8 tons of alien carnivore back into the deep jungle with surprising quiet. Elena exhaled. Her hands were not shaking. She was mildly surprised by that. She opened her field notes and typed, Day 1. Contact with apex megafauna. Designation, Zerath Alpha Predator, Class Unknown. Primary senses, echolocation, chemical trace. Behavioral observation, threat response to large mobile targets. Countermeasure, stillness and chemical suppression. Survived first encounter. The jungle is watching everything. Everything is food here. Everything except, perhaps, me. She kept walking. The jungle pulsed around her in soft blue-green light, and Elena Vasquez began the long, meticulous work of learning how to be the most dangerous thing on Zerath 9. The curriculum of survival. By the end of the 4th day, Elena had a shelter, a water supply, a working understanding of 12 local species, and a very serious problem with what she had started calling the whisper vines. The shelter had come first, not the emergency thermal bivouac from the survival kit, which would have been detected by half the jungle's chemical sensors, but a proper constructed hide built into the root structure of a massive violet bark she had designated VB7 in her field notes. The roots of VB7 rose 3 meters above the ground and curved back down again, creating natural enclosed chambers. She had reinforced 3 of these chambers with dead wood, sealed the gaps with a clay-like mineral paste she had discovered near the river, and covered the exterior with collected foliage to break up her thermal signature. Eris had been helpful in confirming which materials would not off-gas chemical signals that might attract predators. Eris was also, Elena noted in her journal, developing what she could only describe as anxiety about her behavior. You are proposing to approach the river during the peak feeding cycle of the aquatic apex fauna, Eris noted as she packed her water filtration equipment. Based on observed behavioral data, the creatures I have designated river predators Class 1 maintain a territorial feeding circuit of approximately 600 meters along the bank during this period. I know, Elena said. I've been watching them for 2 days. Then you are aware that they consumed a herd animal of approximately 400 kilograms in 8 seconds during yesterday's observation. I clocked it at 6 seconds actually. She tightened the strap on her field kit. They hunt by vibration. Ground vibration specifically. The river water itself creates enough ambient vibration to mask my footfall signature if I stay within 2 meters of the bank. Silence from Eris for 2.3 seconds, which, from an AI that processed at 47 teraflops, was the equivalent of a very long pause. You have been testing this theory. I tested it yesterday morning. And the morning before? You did not log these tests. I was busy surviving them. She almost smiled. I can get to the filtration point in the shallow rocky section, fill the containers and return to VB7 in under 4 minutes if I move at a consistent pace. The river class ones never range more than 40 meters from the deep channel. I verified this on 12 separate observations. This was, Elena understood, the methodology that separated the humans who survived hostile alien environments from the ones who didn't. Not courage. Courage was just the willingness to be afraid and act anyway, and that was a personality trait, not a survival skill. Survival in a Class 4 hostile biosphere required systematic observation, pattern recognition, hypothesis formation, and the particular kind of courage that came from knowing your data was good. Her father had called it, earning your confidence. You didn't get to feel safe because you wanted to feel safe. You earned it, one verified data point at a time. The river run worked exactly as she predicted. She now had 3 liters of filtered water and a new field observation. The river class once communicated via low-frequency water column vibration, and the pattern was complex enough that Eris's preliminary analysis suggested actual structured signaling, possibly language. The whisper vines were a different challenge entirely. She had first noticed them on day 2 as a motionless silver-green tendril reaching from a high branch toward a perching bird analog she had been observing. The tendril had moved with such slowness that she had nearly dismissed it as wind-caused. Then it had touched the bird and the bird had simply stopped. Not died, she confirmed via spectral analyzer that its metabolic functions had continued, but the bird had gone completely inert, standing on its perch, unresponsive to all stimuli. The whisper vine had then wrapped it, slowly, over the next hour and begun digestion. The problem was that whisper vines were ubiquitous. They were in every tree in the forest. They were on the ground. They were, Elena estimated based on a 15-meter transect survey, present at a density of approximately 1 vine per 2.8 square meters of forest floor. She had been stepping over and around them for days without knowing what they were. She spent most of day 4 doing nothing but mapping the whisper vines within 50 meters of VB7. She developed a detection method. The vines gave off a faint ultraviolet fluorescence, invisible to naked human eyes but bright as neon through the spectral analyzer set to UV range. She developed a coating, a combination of the mineral clay paste from the riverbank and a compound she extracted from the bioluminescent bark, that the vines consistently avoided. She tested it on a 2-meter section of her boot sole and confirmed the vines curled away from the coated surface rather than toward it. She spent 4 hours that evening coating every surface of her biosuit that might contact vegetation. Eris watched all of this and, on day 5, said something that surprised her. Dr. Vasquez, I have been modeling your survival probability over time based on accumulated behavioral and environmental data. And? When we crashed, your survival probability at 30 days was 3.7%. At 60 days, 0.4%. Pause. Current recalculated probability at 30 days is 71%. At 60 days, 58%. Elena was quiet for a moment. What changed the model? You did, Eris said. The rate at which you are acquiring actionable knowledge about this environment is not consistent with standard human survival behavior profiles in my database. You are adapting faster than any documented case. More significantly, you are not merely learning to avoid threats. You are learning to use them. The vines, Elena said. Among other things. Your use of the river class 1 vibration pattern as cover. Your identification of the Zerath alpha predator's territorial scent marking behavior and your deliberate avoidance of those zones. Your recognition that the smaller scavenger class animals follow a 20-minute post-event safety period before returning to a disturbance site, which you have been using to safely investigate areas after large predator activity. Another pause. You are not surviving this environment, Dr. Vasquez. You are studying it to death. She laughed, actually laughed the first time since the crash. Felt good. I'm a xenobiologist, she said. This is what I do. What you are doing, Eris said carefully, is becoming part of the ecosystem. The local fauna is beginning to respond to your presence differently. The mid-tier predators, I have been tracking them. 3 of them have now adjusted their patrol routes to avoid the area around VB7. They have made this adjustment based on chemical signals. Your chemical signals. Elena put down the tool she was working with and looked at her wrist terminal. Say that again. You have been present in this ecosystem for 5 days. In that time, you have left chemical traces through the biosuit coating, the clay paste, and your own biological output. 3 separate mid-tier predator species have registered these traces and classified you as something to avoid rather than pursue. Eris's voice, for a synthetic intelligence, had developed a tone she could only describe as impressed. You are being factored into the local predator hierarchy, Dr. Vasquez. Without making any direct confrontation. Through pure chemical presence and behavioral pattern. Elena sat back against the root of VB7 and looked up at the bioluminescent canopy pulsing above her. She thought about what that meant. She thought about the predator that had ignored her on night 1. About the routes she had been taking, carefully, along the territorial edges rather than the centers. About the scent markers she had begun, almost unconsciously, to work into her movement patterns, stepping around the territorial marks of the large predators rather than through them, leaving her own traces in a pattern that, she now realized, resembled nothing in this ecosystem's evolutionary history. She was something new here. Something the jungle had never had to categorize before. Eris, she said slowly, I need you to model something for me. If I continue at this learning rate, new data inputs, new behavioral adaptations, new environmental understanding every 48 hours, where does the 60-day survival probability go? Eris processed. Insufficient data to model accurately. The variables are too novel. But if the current trend line holds. Another pause. I cannot express it as a probability anymore. The model breaks down. What you are doing does not fit the survival framework I was designed to calculate. Good, Elena said. She pulled out her field notes and began writing. Day 5. Local mid-tier fauna now avoiding the VB7 zone. Chemical presence establishing territorial status without confrontation. Next phase, deliberate expansion of known territory. Begin systematic mapping of the alpha predator's range and behavioral schedule. The jungle is learning about me. Now I need to learn faster than it does. She was hungry, her ribs hurt, and Eris had 4 hours of power left before she would have to rely on the solar recharger she had built from emergency kit components. But she was, by any measurable metric, winning. Hector Vasquez would have been proud. Tools, fire, and first blood. On day 11, Elena climbed out of the jungle and found the Obsidian Plateau. She had been following the spine of the eastern ridge for 2 days, driven by a hypothesis she had formed watching the Zerath alpha predators move. They consistently avoided the highland areas. Not cautiously. Not reluctantly. They avoided the highlands the way prey animals avoided open ground, with a kind of species-deep instinct that didn't require conscious calculation. Something up there was above them in the hierarchy. Whatever that something was, Elena Vasquez intended to understand it. The plateau was approximately 2 kilometers wide and 4 long, elevated 400 meters above the jungle canopy, and made almost entirely of a black volcanic glass she recognized as a xenolithic analog to terrestrial obsidian. The edge of the plateau was ringed by a natural curtain of wind-carved stone that created dozens of sheltered alcoves, each one offering both cover and an elevated sight line over the jungle below. She found what she was looking for in the second alcove she investigated. The bones. They were enormous, the largest skeleton of femur the size of a small car, and they were old. Thousands of years old, her spectral analyzer estimated. But they were arranged. Not scattered the way natural death would leave them. Arranged in a rough circle, the way something intelligent might arrange them, if it had even the primitive concept of territory marking through the deliberate display of conquered prey. Whatever lived up here, it was smart enough to think about what its kills meant. It had territorial intelligence. Elena sat with this data for a long time. Then she made a decision that she noted in her field journal was probably insane. She was going to make tools. Not survival tools. Not the improvised instruments she had been cobbling together for 11 days. Real tools. Weapons. The obsidian here was exceptional. She had knapped flint as a hobby since her undergraduate days. It was the kind of thing xenobiology students did to understand early hominin toolmaking, and within 40 minutes of sitting down with a hand-sized river cobble as a percussor, she had a working core and her first usable flake. Within 2 hours she had a knife blank that, when she finished it with pressure flaking using a pointed piece of harder stone, produced an edge that Eris's spectral analyzer rated as sharper than surgical steel. It would not hold that edge long without maintenance, but she had an unlimited supply of raw material. She made a spear next. A 2-meter shaft from a straight-grained branch of highland wood, hardened by holding it near the biofuel flame of a small fire she built in the most sheltered alcove. She hafted the obsidian point with strips of fiber she had been processing for days, a plant analog that, when boiled and dried, produced something with the tensile characteristics of hemp. She bound the haft with tight spiral wrapping and secured it with the clay mineral paste from the river, which set as hard as ceramic when it dried. She tested the spear's balance. Was good. Better than good. Eris said, "You are making weapons. I'm making tools." The distinction appears semantic in the current context. The distinction, Elena said, checking the point seating, is entirely philosophical. A tool is a tool. Its purpose is determined by the situation. She set the spear aside and began working on the next thing, a sling. She had learned to use a sling as a teenager, part of her father's comprehensive program of teaching her every skill he thought the universe might eventually demand. A sling could throw a smooth river stone at speeds that would kill a mid-sized terrestrial animal. She had no reason to believe the physics would be different on Zareth 9. What she was building, she understood clearly, was not just a survival toolkit. She was building a system. Observation plus knowledge plus tools plus positioning equaled leverage, and leverage, in an environment where every biological competitor outweighed her by orders of magnitude, was the only advantage available to a single human being without backup, without heavy equipment, and without the evolutionary history of being at the top of this particular food chain. Humans, she wrote in her journal that evening, did not evolve on Zareth 9. We have no instincts calibrated to this place, no biochemical fear responses tuned to its predators, no automatic reflexes shaped by 10,000 generations of surviving this specific world. Every other creature here is optimized by evolution. I have only learning, tools, and the particular human capacity for thinking through problems that have no precedent. That is, it turns out, enough. The creature that lived on the Obsidian Plateau found her on day 13. It was nocturnal and she had been watching for it for 2 days, having identified its behavioral signature. A wide-frequency electromagnetic pulse that preceded its emergence by approximately 20 minutes, which her Eris terminal detected as a disruption in local field readings. When the pulse came, she was ready. She was in the deepest of the sheltered alcoves, motionless, with her spear and 3 loaded sling projectiles arranged in sequence beside her. The creature was approximately 3 meters tall and moved on 4 legs in a low-slung rolling gait that reminded her of a hyena scaled up enormously and given an additional pair of manipulator limbs, slender, surprisingly dexterous forelimbs that it used to investigate the rock face near her position with disturbing intelligence. Its sensory apparatus was primarily electrical. It could detect bioelectric fields, which meant her biosuit's filter collar was useless. It already knew, with biological certainty, that something alive and unfamiliar was in this alcove. What it did not know was whether that something was dangerous. Elena had spent 2 days preparing this moment. She had not simply been waiting. She had been setting a context, a chemical and physical context designed to communicate as clearly as biology allowed, that this alcove was occupied by something that did not belong to the established prey categories of this world. She had spread the mineral paste in the configuration she had observed the alpha predators use for territorial marking. She had placed the arranged bones, the ancient trophies from the first alcove, in the entrance to hers, mimicking the display behavior she had documented. She had burned a small fire earlier that day and let the smoke drift through the alcove, establishing a new chemical signature in a space that already carried the traces of whatever apex creature had historically used it. And when the plateau creature lowered its angular head to peer into the alcove and encountered all of this, the territorial marks, the bone display, the unknown chemical signature, and a strange bipedal figure sitting perfectly still in the center of it with a long pointed tool extended toward it, it stopped. Its electrical sensing swept her. She could feel it like a mild static charge across her skin through the biosuit. It was reading her bioelectric field in detail. It knew exactly how large she was. It knew she was a single organism. It knew she was warm-blooded and biochemically novel. What it could not calculate was what she would do. Elena held absolutely still and held the spear pointed directly at its sensory cluster. Not aggressively, she kept the angle and posture consistent with the neutral territorial challenge displays she had documented in the mid-tier predators. Not an attack posture. A presence posture. I am here. I am not prey. I have not attacked you. But I will. 30 seconds. A minute. The creature shifted its weight. Its manipulator limbs reached toward the bone display at the alcove entrance, investigated one of the largest bones with careful delicacy, then withdrew. Then the plateau creature backed away. Slowly, with its sensory cluster still directed at the alcove, it retreated 5 meters, then 10, then turned and disappeared over the far edge of the plateau with the unhurried economy of movement that told Elena everything. It had not run. It had simply decided she was not, at this moment, worth the investigation. She stayed motionless for another 20 minutes, listening. Then she lowered the spear and let out a breath that had been building for 3 minutes. She opened her field journal. Day 13. Direct contact with plateau apex fauna, designation PAF-1. Electrical sensory biology. Territorial intelligence confirmed. Bone arrangement is deliberate trophy display. Interaction result. Mutual recognition, no conflict. I presented as a novel territorial entity rather than as prey or intruder. PAF-1 retreated without aggression. She paused, then added, I am no longer the bottom of any hierarchy I have encountered on this planet. The jungle does not have a category for me yet. I'm making my own. Below the plateau, the bioluminescent jungle pulsed in slow, breathing rhythms, blue and green and alive in every direction as far as she could see. Somewhere down there, Okafor was still breathing and Chen was still in cryo. Somewhere out there, a rescue mission was either coming or it wasn't. Either way, Elena Vasquez had work to do. The hierarchy shifts. On day 22, Elena met the Veth. She had been following the data for 3 days before she understood what she was looking at. Eris had flagged a series of anomalous readings in the central megaforest, thermal signatures that moved in coordinated patterns too complex for purely instinct-driven behavior, chemical traces that repeated in consistent sequences, and, most strikingly, what appeared to be physical modification of the environment. Tree limbs repositioned. Stones arranged in geometric patterns around water sources. Bark carved in regular marks at consistent heights above the ground. Not instinct. Not random. Intent. Eris, she had said looking at the data. These are tool users. The evidence supports that conclusion, Eris agreed. I estimate a social group of 12 to 18 individuals operating in the central hollow. Based on the scale of the physical modifications, I would place their body size at approximately 0.8 to 1.1 meters in height. The carved marks appear in clusters of 3, 5, and 7, prime numbers. They can count. They appear to have a numerical concept, yes. Elena had changed all of her plans for day 22 immediately. The Veth, she gave them the name on first sighting from the Farsi word for family, a private homage to her mother, were roughly half her height, bilaterally symmetrical, with 4 limbs they used interchangeably for locomotion and manipulation. Their sensory clusters were centered in broad, flat faces with large amber eyes capable of independent targeting, the eyes of a creature that had evolved being hunted from multiple directions simultaneously. Their skin was chromatophore-rich, shifting constantly between blue, green, and gold in patterns she quickly recognized as communicative rather than camouflage. They had spears. Shorter than hers, obsidian-tipped, beautifully made. They had cordage. They had what appeared to be ceramic containers around a central fire. They had, in short, a material culture. And they had seen her 3 hours before she found them. She understood this when she walked into the Great Hollow, a natural clearing around the base of the oldest and largest tree she had yet encountered, its trunk wider than a city block, its roots forming a series of elevated platforms like natural architecture, and found 12 Veth arranged in a semicircle facing her approach. Not fleeing. Not attacking. Waiting. The spectral analyzer registered an immediate surge of chromatophore activity among the group, colors she had been cataloging on isolated sightings now appearing in complex compound sequences. Eris's pattern analysis had been accumulating Veth color language data from a distance for 12 hours. It was not enough for translation. But it was enough for elementary sentiment analysis. The predominant color pattern across the group, Eris reported, is the sequence I have cataloged as appearing during proximity to the alpha predators. Cross-referenced with the behavioral context, they are stationary in a defensive formation, but have not deployed their spears. My best interpretation is, respectful fear. They are afraid of you, but they have chosen to remain and meet you rather than flee. Elena stopped at 20 meters and went absolutely still. She set her own spear on the ground slowly, with deliberate visibility. She placed her field kit beside it. She sat down in the clearing and put her hands on her knees, empty, open, palms up, which was not a Veth gesture but was the clearest way she knew to say, I have put down my weapons. I'm not attacking. The chromatophore patterns shifted across the group. Rapid consultation. A long pause. Then the largest Veth, whose color patterns had been most complex and whom Elena immediately tagged as a leadership figure, walked toward her. Slowly. Its amber eyes were locked on her face with an intensity she recognized across every species she had ever studied. The look of a mind encountering something completely outside its experience and refusing to look away from it. It stopped 3 meters from her. It looked at her empty hands. It looked at the spear on the ground. It looked at her face for a long time. Then it lowered its own spear to the ground, sat down facing her, and put its hands on its knees in a mirror of her posture. Elena felt something she had not felt since before the crash: hope. Not the survivor's grim practical hope of "I might make it through this day." Something warmer. Something that recognized intelligence on the other side of an incomprehensible distance and felt, in the recognition, less alone. The weeks that followed were the most demanding intellectual work of Elena's life, and she had spent 11 years doing postdoctoral xenobiological fieldwork. Learning the rudiments of Veth color language required her to understand a communication system that operated simultaneously on 3 channels: color pattern, pattern speed, and body orientation, each of which modulated the meaning of the others. Eris processed the raw data. Elena provided the contextual interpretation. Together they built a working lexicon of approximately 200 concepts over 30 days. What the Veth taught her was more valuable than anything Eris could calculate. They knew Zerath 9 in its bones. They knew the seasonal patterns of the alpha predator's territorial cycles. They knew which plants were pharmacologically active and in what preparations. Knowledge accumulated across generations that had developed empirically, through the same patient observation Elena herself relied on, but over centuries rather than weeks. They knew the plateau creature, which they called, in color language, the electrical ghost, and its habits with the precision of people who had been living alongside it for their entire species' history. In exchange, Elena gave them things. Not technology. She was adamant with herself about this. Catastrophic contact errors in colonial history were almost universally caused by technology transfer that destabilized social structures before receiving cultures could adapt. What she gave them was methodology. The spectral analyzer, used to examine a plant compound they had been using medicinally for centuries, revealed the active molecule structure and allowed her to identify 3 other plants with higher concentrations of the same compound. She showed them this process not as magic but as a process: observable, repeatable, learnable. She showed them her field notes as a communication concept, the recording of observations for analysis later. The Veth elder, whom she had eventually named Saren in her own notes after watching the particular luminous blue of his leadership displays, watched her write in her field journal one evening with an expression she had learned to read as profound concentration. Then he picked up a smooth piece of bark and, using a sharpened stick, began marking on it. He was copying her field note structure. Column by column, mark by mark, working out the principle of systematic recording from a single observation. Elena watched him do it and felt something close to awe. He was not copying content. He was understanding and reproducing the concept. On day 41, the Veth helped her move Okafor and Chin from the wreckage of the Resolute to the Great Hollow. The Resolute was too damaged and its location too exposed in the lower jungle, and Elena had decided that the Great Hollow, elevated, defensible, populated by the only sapient species on the planet, was the best possible position to hold for rescue. On day 47, Okafor regained consciousness. He woke to find himself in a clean, warm, protected shelter in the roots of the largest tree he had ever seen, tended by a dozen 4-limbed aliens whose skin rippled with bioluminescent color patterns, with Dr. Elena Vasquez sitting beside him eating something that smelled surprisingly like roasted food, wearing a biosuit covered in clay paste and obsidian chips, with a handmade spear leaning against the root behind her. "You look terrible," he said. "You've been unconscious for 41 days, she said. "You're one to talk." "Where are we?" "Safe," she said. "Relatively. There's a lot I need to explain." "Are those aliens?" "Those are the Veth," Elena said. "Saren, the one with the blue patterns, says hello." That translates approximately. He actually said something closer to, "We see you and find you acceptable," which in Veth social context is a significant compliment. Okafor stared at her for a long moment. "You've been out here 41 days. 47 actually. And you've..." He gestured at the shelter, at the Veth, at the tools hung neatly on the root wall, at what were unmistakably organized food storage containers. "You built all this." "We built it," Elena corrected, with a slight emphasis on the first word that Okafor would spend a long time thinking about later. "Saren's people and I." She handed him a container of water. "Drink. Slowly. We need to work on getting your muscle function back. Eris has a rehabilitation protocol. Then we need to brief you on local threat fauna, safe zones, communication protocols with the Veth, food safety, and about 40 pages of field notes that you're going to need to read." Okafor drank. Looked at the alien jungle beyond the shelter entrance. Looked at the Veth, who regarded him with calm amber eyes and shifting colors of what he would eventually learn to read as friendly assessment. looked at the woman beside him who had gone into a hostile alien jungle alone with a knife and a field kit and come out 47 days later having apparently become part of the ecosystem. "Doc," he said. "What exactly did you do out there?" Elena looked at her field journal, at the filled pages, at months of observations about a world that was no longer entirely alien to her. "I paid attention," she said. "That's all. I paid very close attention." Apex. The rescue ship UES Persistence detected the emergency beacon on day 68 and achieved orbital insertion on day 71. The signal had been intermittent due to the ionization layer, which was why it had taken so long. When Commander Adiz Okonkwo descended in a dropship with a 6-person rescue team and full emergency medical kit, she expected to find wreckage, bodies, and possibly 1 or 2 very traumatized survivors if she was lucky. What she found was considerably more complicated. The dropship came down in the only clear landing zone within 10 kilometers, a perfectly circular area of open ground in the central megaforest, approximately 300 meters in diameter, which her sensors showed had been deliberately cleared. Not cleared by heavy equipment. Cleared by hand over what the geophysical data suggested was several weeks of work. At the edge of this clearing stood what appeared to be a greeting party, a tall woman in a heavily modified biosuit, a large man in a support brace who moved with the careful deliberateness of a person still recovering from neurological injury, and approximately 14 small, quadrilimbid aliens whose skin displayed complex, synchronized color patterns. Commander Okonkwo stepped out of the dropship. The tall woman came forward, extending her hand. She had a homemade obsidian knife at her hip and the calm, measuring eyes of someone who had spent a long time making decisions with insufficient data and had gotten good at it. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," the woman said. "UES Resolute. We are very glad to see you. Commander Okonkwo." She took the hand. "How many survivors?" 3 present and accounted for. Engineer Okafor, functional. Dr. Chin, cryostabilized but stable. She'll need full medical care as soon as we can get her to the Persistence. Vasquez paused. "And myself." Okonkwo's medical officer had pushed past her toward Okafor. Her security team was arrayed in a loose perimeter, hands near weapons, watching the Veth with the professional wariness of people trained for hostile contact scenarios. "Commander," Vasquez said quietly, stepping closer. "A request. Your security team needs to stand down. The Veth, the small individuals with the chromatophore display, are the sapient indigenous species of this world and they are our allies. They are also, I should note, extremely good at reading behavioral signals, and right now your team is displaying what in Veth color language translates as aggressive territorial challenge. In about 30 seconds, you are going to start seeing orange and red patterns in the group, which means they are becoming alarmed." Okonkwo studied her. Then she turned to her security team. "Stand down. Weapons away." The tension in the color displays eased almost immediately. Gold and blue returned to the dominant patterns. "You can read them," Okonkwo said. "I've been here 73 days, Vasquez said. "I can read them well enough to hold a working conversation. Eris has a preliminary lexicon of approximately 340 concepts. The Veth Elder, Saren, has been recording his own observations of our species in parallel. We have been exchanging knowledge for 30 days. Okonkwo took a moment with this. Then she said, slowly, "Dr. Vasquez, when we received the emergency beacon and began reviewing the Survey Corps classification for Zareth 9, the file said Class 4 hostile biosphere, megafauna confirmed, colonization risk, extreme caution. Can you give me a realistic assessment of conditions on the ground?" Elena looked at the jungle. At the great hollow visible in the distance. At the Veth, arranged in their greeting formation with all the dignity of people who understood exactly what this moment was and had dressed for it in their own fashion. Their color displays synchronized into a formal welcoming pattern she had only ever seen them use for significant occasions. "The Class 4 rating is accurate for an unprepared contact," she said. "The megafauna is genuine and the threat is real. There are approximately 15 distinct species I would classify as apex or near-apex predators, several of which are biologically exceptional by any standard." She paused. "However, the biosphere is also far more complex and navigable than the Survey Corps rating implies. The threat level drops dramatically with detailed local knowledge, which the Veth have in abundance, accumulated over generations. They are willing to share it. They have been sharing it with me. And the apex fauna? The largest predators. The Zarath alpha predator, the largest land carnivore, maintains a territorial cycle that makes it predictable and avoidable with basic knowledge of its behavioral patterns. The PAF-1, the plateau-dwelling species, is intelligent enough to be approached through territorial communication rather than conflict. She chose her next words carefully. I have not had a violent encounter with any fauna on this world. Every significant encounter has been resolved through observation, behavioral understanding, and communication. Okonkwo looked at her for a long moment. You've been here 73 days alone, essentially alone, on a Class 4 world, and your first contact with rescue is to tell me the threat classification is overstated. The threat classification, Elena said, was made by remote sensor survey without ground truth data. I have 73 days of ground truth data. The world is dangerous. It is not unconquerable. It just requires that you pay attention to it. The debriefing on the persistence took 11 hours. Elena's field notes ran to 847 pages. Eris's data logs were an additional 2,300 pages of raw sensor data, behavioral analysis, and the preliminary VETH language lexicon. The Survey Corps First Contact Protocol officer who reviewed it, a small, precise woman named Dr. Leung who had been doing contact assessment for 30 years, told Elena it was the most comprehensive 73-day field record she had ever seen from a solo contact scenario. Most people in your situation, Dr. Leung said carefully, would have focused entirely on immediate survival. The shelter, the water, the food. The threat avoidance. That's what I did, Elena said. You also produced 847 pages of scientific field notes. Observation is survival, Elena said. The notes were survival. Every page of those notes is something I learned that kept me alive the next day. The VETH language lexicon, that's the most valuable thing in the entire record in terms of keeping me alive. Because when I could communicate with Saren's people, they gave me knowledge worth 100 years of solo observation. Dr. Leung looked at her notes. The Survey Corps is going to want to classify this as a first contact event. The VETH are clearly sapient by any metric. That triggers the non-intervention protocol. I know, Elena said. I've been thinking about it. I don't think the standard NI protocol is appropriate here. Because we already have contact. And more importantly, the VETH made contact with me. Deliberately. They had been observing me for days before that first meeting. Saren made the decision to approach rather than avoid. The standard NI protocol assumes humans initiate contact with a species that hasn't yet chosen engagement. The VETH chose engagement. Removing ourselves from that relationship now would be, in my judgment, a more significant violation of their agency than continuing it with appropriate protocols. There was a long silence. I'm going to recommend, Elena continued, that the Survey Corps classify Zareth 9 as a mutual contact world and develop a joint study program with VETH participation and consent. I have Saren's preliminary agreement, communicated and confirmed, for an ongoing exchange relationship on terms of mutual benefit. His people want access to our methodology, not our technology, our way of accumulating and recording knowledge. Dr. Leung studied her. You negotiated a first contact framework with a pre-industrial sapient species in 30 days, on a Class 4 hostile world, without any diplomatic training. I had diplomatic training, Elena said. It was called Growing Up with My Father. On the day before the Persistence broke orbit, Commander Okonkwo took a dropship down to the Great Hollow with Elena, Okafor, ambulatory now and slowly recovering, and a small documentary crew. Okonkwo stood at the edge of the clearing and watched Saren conduct what Elena explained was a formal record-keeping ceremony, the elder transcribing the summary of recent events onto bark panels in the recording system he had developed from Elena's field notes, surrounded by younger VETH who were learning the system. He developed written language, Okonkwo said. In 30 days. From watching you take field notes. He developed a written language in 30 days because he had already developed the conceptual framework for it, Elena corrected gently. Saren's people have been systematically observing and categorizing their world for generations. They had the cognition. They needed the method. She paused. He told me, in the color language, so this is a rough translation, that he thinks of what I taught him as fixing memory to stone so it doesn't blow away. He was very pleased with that formulation. Okonkwo was quiet for a moment. In the medical debrief, the doctor said your physiological adaptation markers are off the charts. Your muscle density, your sensory sensitivity, your cortisol regulation. She said it's like you spent 73 days doing extreme athletic and cognitive training simultaneously. I did, Elena said simply. She also said your threat response patterns have changed. You don't show the standard stress markers when exposed to large predator vocalization samples. You show something she described as interested alertness instead of fear response. I spent 73 days learning that fear without information is just noise, Elena said. Once you have the information, the fear resolves into attention. And attention is useful. Fear mostly isn't. Below the plateau, the jungle pulsed with its eternal bioluminescent rhythm. The Veth went about their careful, intelligent lives. The alpha predators moved along their territorial routes in the deep forest, unaware that a new variable had entered their world and had already begun to change it, not through dominance or destruction, but through the most profoundly human of all survival strategies, curiosity. Elena looked out at the world she had spent 73 days learning to be part of. She thought about her father's knife, still on her hip, its edge maintained over 2 months of daily work. She thought about the field notes that would reshape the Survey Corps classification protocol for alien first contact. She thought about Saren, recording history onto bark in a notation system adapted from her handwriting, and about what would grow from that seed over the generations to come. She thought about what it meant to be human. Not in the triumphalist sense. Not the humanity that conquered and dominated through force of technology or numbers or the sheer mass of civilization. The older kind of humanity. The kind that had walked out of one environment and into another with nothing but attention and adaptability and the stubbornly persistent belief that understanding was possible. The kind that had looked at a world full of things larger and faster and stronger than it, and responded not with despair but with curiosity. Her father had said the universe would eventually put a knife in her hand. What he hadn't told her, what perhaps he hadn't known, was that the knife was only ever the last option. The real tool, the one that mattered, the one that had kept her alive and built something worth preserving on a world that had never learned to fear her, was the field journal. The observations. The relentless, patient, humble practice of paying attention to things she did not yet understand. That was what humans were, at their best. Not the apex predator. Not the conqueror. The learner. The one who looked at an incomprehensible world and said, I don't understand this yet. Let me begin. She pulled out her field journal. She had started a new volume on the persistence, but the last page of the old one still had room. She wrote, Day 73. Departing Zerath 9 with Okafor and Chin for medical treatment and full debriefing. Returning to a world I understand, carrying records of a world I am only beginning to. The Veth are well. Saren is recording. The jungle continues. No final conclusions. Only preliminary findings and the strong conviction that this is the beginning of something, not the end of anything. Recommendation, return. She closed the journal. Below the dropship, the great hollow shrank to a point of warm light in the vast blue-green dark of the Zerath 9 canopy, pulsing slowly like a breath. Like something alive. Like something that had learned, over 73 days, to recognize her. She was not afraid of it. She never had been really. Not once she had started paying attention.